The good word says out there that the best thing that can happen to a community or to a society is to have the same vision and mission. So we are fighting to establish foundations and to be able to put ourselves all in the same tune and with the same spirit be able to talk about all these key points. And we have reached number 7. We have reached the 7th place, the divine number, the number of God. And at this point, it's our turn to talk about community. So how can we call ourselves a community? For that, we have to go to history. So let us prepare our word, the word of God. Let us get ready and be willing to invest these minutes, which will be of much information, of much blessing, to be able to analyze how it is that now we can consider ourselves a community of faith, a Christian community. To see the value that we have to give to this term, since it costs the lives of many servants of God, of many characters who were willing to give up their comfort, to give up their normal life. They could have been fathers or grandfathers, but they decided to follow and die in the name of Christ. The first Christians. Jerusalem was the city in which Jesus was crucified by the Romans, and it was in that city where the first Christians began their apostolate. Jesus did not leave a rule, and soon there were discrepancies. Some of them were discussed in the Council of Jerusalem around the year 50 AD, a meeting that is narrated in 2 sources of the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles and the letter to the Galatians. The council is considered the starting point of transformation of Christianity, which goes from being a Jewish sect of a local character to a universal religion. In that meeting of elders and apostles, Peter opts for the idea of souls brought to faith. Let us pay attention and with our Bibles take notes. Therefore, it was decided that the Gentiles converted to Christianity were not obliged to maintain some of the norms of the law of Moses, such as the rules relating to the circumcision of males. We are in the confusing apostolic period, which covers the life of the apostles until the first decade of the 2nd century. Among its most important leaders were, besides the aforementioned Peter, John the Apostle, as John the Evangelist, and James the Just, who was the brother of Jesus. This last one must not be confused with James the Apostle or James the Great, who was the brother of John, and who, years before the Council of Jerusalem, had been ordered to be killed in the same city, beheaded with a sword. In addition to that small Judeo-Christian community that began to preach the word of Jesus, some pagans joined them, besides other followers of the law of Moses, as is the case of Saul, who also is called Paul. Saul was a native of Tarsus, a commercial city, center of cults of all kinds, that is to say, a focus of religious syncretism. He was a Roman citizen, but from an ultra-conservative Jewish family. He had his first contact with the followers of Jesus in Jerusalem, and dedicated himself to persecuting them. In the Acts of the Apostles, it is said that Saul wrought havoc in the church. He entered through the houses, he took away by force men and women and put them in prison. He witnessed the execution of the deacon Stephen, who was stoned. After the martyrdom of Stephen, on the road to Damascus, he had a revelation. He fell to the ground, he heard the voice of Jesus, and converted to Christianity. Later, tradition placed Saul on the back of a horse before the fall. After this well-known event, he was baptized and began his ministry. It is often said, although erroneously, that from the moment his name was changed from Saul to Paul, giving a new direction to his life, that the faith of the convert led him to undertake the great journeys with the mission of preaching the gospel. Not a few times has Paul been accused of inventing Christianity, and it is true that he gave body and form to the primitive Christian church, but as the historian Paul Johnson explained, the truth is that Paul did not invent Christianity, nor did he pervert it. He saved it from extinction. Between the first and second journey, he had the occasion to attend the Council of Jerusalem, where he coincided with Peter and the other apostles. It was Paul who convinced the others about the futility of imposing the rite of circumcision on the Gentile converts. There were some differences that grew after the dispute of Antioch, Some authors point out that Paul opted for a more breakaway current with Judaism, in contrast to the more conservative current that represented James, the brother of Jesus. Peter, with a more adaptive character, would be a kind of bridge person between both. Although the epicenter of Christianity was in Asia Minor, the objective was the expansion of the Christian doctrine within the Roman Empire, and for that it was necessary to go to Rome, the capital of the same. Peter did so, leaving the Jerusalem circle completely, accepting the theology of Paul. Tradition shows Peter as the founder of the Roman community, being its first bishop. That is why he is presented by the Catholic Church as the first pope, according to the words Jesus addressed to him, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Peter, in fact, means rock. The prominent disciple ended his days in Rome, and there he died, martyred around the year 67, during the reign of Nero. Around that same time, Paul also died as a martyr in Rome, just like Peter. At that time, the Jewish population had rebelled against the Roman Empire, until about the year 70, when the Roman legions commanded by Titus destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. The diaspora of the Jews begins although the Christians reorganized into a community around Simeon of Jerusalem, who once again began the evangelical preaching throughout Palestine, not without many difficulties. Regarding Andrew the fisherman, one of the first followers of Jesus and brother of Peter, tradition says that he founded an episcopal seed in Byzantine, which would be the second Rome, known since the 4th century as Constantinople. And he ended up martyred, like almost all of the great names of early Christianity. Iconography usually represents him crucified on an X-shaped cross, known as the Cross of St. Andrew. Another of the first areas of extension of Christianity was North Africa, and specifically Egypt, where the evangelist Mark arrived to end up founding the Church of Alexandria. The teachings of Jesus were well received, since it was a region where a flourishing Jewish community already existed. Christianity also spreads through Syria, in cities like Antioch, present-day Turkey, or Damascus, and in coastal enclaves that are currently located in Lebanon, such as Tyre, Sidon, and Tripoli. Antioch of Syria is the most important enclave of primitive Christianity after Jerusalem. It was Barnabas who arrived in these lands, sent by the Jerusalem community. Barnabas also called Paul to lend him a hand, and according to the letters of Paul, Peter himself was there for a time before departing for Rome. Antioch was a very populated city, cosmopolitan and Hellenized, a commercial and cultural enclave where educated people and a good part of the population, including the Christian community, spoke Greek. The different customs became a source of disputes within the Christian community. Fractions between those who spoke Greek and those who spoke the language of the Jews, or between Gentiles and Judaizers. Despite the difficulties, the Church of Antioch ended up being very important, becoming one of the 5 patriarchates of the Church of the first millennium, along with Jerusalem, Rome, Byzantium, later renamed as Constantinople, and Alexandria. Christian communities always kept the practice of their faith alive. To this contributed the apostolic fathers, who did not know Jesus but did know the apostles. This is a case of Clement from Rome, who knew Peter and Paul. Clement was the 4th bishop of Rome after Peter, Linus and Anacletus, and is the author, just as Paul, of a famous epistle to the Corinthians, which is considered the first great work of Christian literature outside the New Testament canon. He was also martyred. He was thrown into the sea with an anchor tied to his neck. Another of the apostolic fathers was Ignatius of Antioch, disciple of the apostle John. He is the author of 7 letters which he wrote over the course of a few while being led from Syria to Rome, on the way to a tragic end, to be devoured by the lions of the Roman circus. The last of the letters is a personal writing addressed to his friend Polycarp, also a disciple of the apostle John, and also an apostolic father. Polycarp was bishop of Smyrna, one of the 7 churches of Asia. Around the year 155, he was martyred, burned at the stake. Heresies began from the very birth of Christianity. Christianity had already been perceived as a heresy of Judaism, And the theology of Paul, the one that ended up prevailing, was also perceived as heretical, and Paul himself was considered a heretic. There were always problems in maintaining unity within a babel of different voices that frequently produced a strong animosity within the heart of Christianity. That is why it was very important that at the end of the 2nd century, a disciple of Polycarp named Irenaeus, at that time Bishop of Lyon, would write against heresies, a fundamental work within Christian theology. From the 3rd century onwards, communities multiply, and so do Christian authors, especially in Syria and North Africa. In the West, the main language of worship ceases to be Greek and becomes Latin. Theology advances and deepens into the details of the Trinitarian doctrine. The first to use the term Trinity, Trinitas in Latin, was Tertulliano, one of the fathers of the Church. The Christian world was marked by persecution from its beginnings, but it takes shape during the reign of Nero and continues with interruptions until the era of the great persecutions of Diocletian, known as the era of the martyrs. For this reason, one of the characteristics of early Christianity was its clandestinity. Furthermore, with the start of the persecutions and the first martyrs, the custom of performing the liturgy in the place where those martyrs were buried was acquired. From there, for example, the habit of praying in the catacombs of Rome, where Christian symbols were being placed, such as the Good Shepherd, which appears in the catacombs of St. Calixtus, or the symbol of the fish, which became very popular. The community, seeing that some of those Christians ended up martyred, began to take them as a model. That is why the literary genre of the Acta Martyrum became popular, which vibrantly describes the persecution and death of the holy martyrs. But finally, the Christians would find peace. After the failures of Diocletian, the persecutions would cease. 2 edicts put an end to the clandestinity: the Edict of Tolerance of Nicodemia from the year 311, and above all, the Edict of Milan from 313, with which religious freedoms are granted within the limits of the Roman Empire. Perhaps from a natural perspective and not a spiritual one, this is only seen as a story full of pain and suffering. But the word of the Lord tells us how beautiful are the feet of those who announce peace. We are clear about our calling. At this point, the 7th one, it's very important to emphasize that just as some have distorted the word of the Lord, as we saw in point 6 with the false prosperity gospel, imagine what it would be like to take the truth of the word, to take a verse, to form a community, to expand the kingdom. How amazing would it be for people to strengthen themselves with the same intention? If we manage to use the word of truth in a correct manner, imagine how much reach the gospel can have. In every community, in every neighborhood, where money is not requested, but where one seeks to grow as a community in God.